17. Car Majestic to Coruscant Command. Techno-Union vessel is now drifting. Damage assessment is incomplete, but it is no longer returning fire. Vengeance is standing by to dispatch a boarding party. We'll continue to provide turbolasers gunnery support to Omega Squad. Who activated the emergency systems? Which decut hit the button? Tell me. Guess Hokan found himself shouting. He had abandoned dignity. Open this Decutla bulkhead. Captain Harati's voice was strained. They were both on the wrong side of the first safety bulkhead. In a single unforgiving corridor that led to the entrance, and the main doors were jammed shut. It was a very secure building, and as Uthan had said, it was designed to stop anything from getting out if things went wrong. It was doing that well. We've been infiltrated, sir. I worked that out for myself, Decut. He was interrupted by a grenade exploding against the front wall. How in the name of... I don't know yet, sir, but the bulkheads activated because the containment chamber doors weren't registering on the system as closed, and it triggered the emergency systems. Stuck open, in other words, yes. Hokan swung around on the nearest droid. Anyone up on the surface see signs of entry? A pause. Negative. Oh, how he longed for decent communications again. He could guess from the strength and directions of some of the explosions that the area was coming under laser cannon fire, which meant the Republic's assault ship had finally showed its hand. It could even be landing more troops. But that wasn't his immediate concern. The bad news was that somebody had already managed to get in, and not through the front door. They couldn't have come in through the drains. They shouldn't have been there. But there was firing, and droids were reporting casualties. There were Republic commandos inside the facility. Hokan had never thought himself infallible, but he had at least imagined he was exceptionally competent. He locked down the facility, and they'd still found a way in. His first thought was that Uthan had wanted a live subject so badly that she was prepared to lure them in and trap one. But that was ludicrous. She hadn't the means or the opportunity to bypass security. The nanovirus was out of Hokan's reach, behind bulkheads that wouldn't yield. Droids patiently fired blasters into the face of the alloy. But as in his earlier tests, they were making no impressions beyond heating the sealed corridor to tropical temperatures. Do we know if all the bulkheads are down? He asked the droid. His comment with its peers made it suddenly a lot more useful than Harati. All of them. Hokan was trying to work out if he had any ways of getting to Uthan, or the nanovirus. The control board in the office off the main corridor was showing red throughout, but he didn't know whether to believe it or not. All of them, droids trapped in sections 4, 5, 7, and 12. It felt like being in the middle of a brawl, and then finding yourself dragged off your opponent. The enemy couldn't get at him, but now he couldn't get at them either. And if the biohazard chamber doors were open, then both the nanovirus and Uthan were on the Commando's side of the barrier. If they had managed to get in, they could probably get out the same way. The front was shuttered. Even if any droids had survived the assault on the villa, how would reinforcements help him now? Hoken turned to Harati. Can you get into the systems and override the safety controls? I'll do my best, sir. Harati's face said that he doubted it, but he'd die trying. He retreated to the office with Hokan, and they rummaged through the cabinets and drawers, looking for operating instructions, tools, anything that might be used to release the bulkheads. In one cabinet, Hokan found a crowbar, but his edges were too thick to get any purchase in the flimsy thin gap between the two sections of the front door, or the lower edge of the bulkhead. He flung it to the floor in frustration, and it clattered across the tiles. The doors needed a blast or some magnitude, but he didn't have the ordnance. Harati removed the cover from the alarm panel and began poking the tip of his knife experimentally into the maze of circuits and switches. Hoken took out the lightsaber and took a swipe at the bulkhead, more out of frustration than any expectations of success. Vzz. The air took on an oddly ozonic smell, almost irritating in its intensity. He stared at the bulkhead's previously smooth surface. There was a definite depression. He made another pass with the blade, more slowly and controlled this time. He pressed his face close to the cooling metal at one edge and squinted across the flat surface, one eye closed. Yes, it was definitely warping the alloy. But at this rate, it would take him hours to cut through. He suspected time was a luxury he couldn't afford. Something thudded into the wall of the corridor. Domin didn't even hear the shatter gun fire. The Verpine projectile was never in danger of hitting anyone, but he suspected they'd have known all about it if it had. Wow, that's some dent, Etten said. I don't think the good doctor is going to come quietly, though. Nina, are you picking this up? Domin said. Found her. Just like that. There was a faint sound of movement in his earpiece. He'd switched off the video feed. Nina sounded almost relaxed. That's the first bit of luck we've had. Yeah, but she's got a Verpine on her. They're fragile weapons, and they don't bounce. Give her a fright. I've got a few frighteners already. If you need a hand, we are going to have trouble getting in. I reckon all the emergency doors have shut tight. All quiet out there, apart from Majestic getting too on target for comfort. Yes. We don't want to take the whole building out with you still inside. Can you go back for the other ram and try to force the front doors open? Do you need us to? We'll try getting Uthan out via the drains. If we can't, it's plan D. Cheer up. Still got E through Z plans, Fi's voice said. One day, Fi, I'm going to give you a good slap, Daman said. Aten held up his hand for silence. Daman heard the faint sibilance of whispered conversations, and then the door slammed and the lock clunked. So it wasn't an automatic safety door. Uthin had company. She really doesn't know me, does she? Daman said, and peeled off a few centimeters of thermal tape. He checked around the corner with a probe, loath to test his armor against the verpine. I'm going to take more than a lock to keep me out, sweetheart. He hugged the wall. He was nearly at the door when it opened, and he found himself face to face with two Trandoshans, who seemed pretty surprised to see him. Maybe it was the armor. It seemed to have that effect. There was nowhere to run. There were times when you could pull your rifle and times when you couldn't. And DCs weren't much good at point-blank range, unless you used them as a club. Daman aimed an instinctive punch before he thought about what he would do with the explosives in his hand. Even with an armored gauntlet, it was like hitting a stone block in the face. The Trandoshans fell back 2 paces. Then his comrade came at Daman with a blade. There was a frozen second or two of bewilderment as the trainee looked at his knife, and then at Daman's armor. Aten, want to give me a hand here, Daman said quietly, taking one step back with vibroblade extended. What do... Oh. Yeah. Oh. The nice thing about a fixed vibroblade was that nobody could knock it out of your hand. Not unless they took your arm off with it. The tranny seemed to be considering that as an option before taking a huge lunge, the blade of his weapon skidding off Daman's arm plate. Daman ran at the tranny heads first and cannoned into him, throwing him against the wall and pinning him there while he tried to drive the vibroblade into soft tissue. He tried for the throat, big blood vessels, quick effect, but the tranny had his wrist clamped tight. It was taking Daman all his strength to keep the enemy's blade from his own throat. It seemed like a deadlock. The bodysuit was stab-proof, wasn't it? He couldn't see Aten. He had to concentrate on his own predicament, and he wasn't getting anywhere fast with the tranny. It was time for one of those bar brawls tactics that Scarlata made sure they all learned. Daman scraped his boots along the tranny's shin and brought it down hard on his instep. It gave him the split second of loosened grip he needed, and he plunged the vibroblade in up to its hilt, over and over, not sure what he was hitting, but noting that the tranny was shrieking and that the shrieks were gradually getting fainter. Scarlata was right. Stabbing someone was a slow way to kill them. He pressed his forearm against the tranny's neck and held him pinned while he slid it down the wall. Daman followed him all the way down and finally knelt on his chest to make sure he didn't move while he jammed the blade up under his jaw and across his trachea. He waited for him to stop moving, then scrambled to his feet to see Aten standing over the other Trandoshans. Still cursing. There was a lot of blood, and it didn't look like Aten's. I could have done without the interruptions, Damin said. Ruins your concentrations, Aten said. Where were we? About to use my universal key. Damin retrieved the ribbon's charge from the floor, wiped it on his sleeve, and set it with its detonator against the lock. They moved quickly to the hinge side, and Aten drew the Trandoshan's array blaster he'd been so unwilling to abandon. Aten, it's capture alive, remember. She's got company. You make sure you need to use it then. If they'd wanted her disintegrated, they'd have said, Darman, took out the stun grenade and the mini EMP. She might have droids in there, too. He juggled both spheres in one hand. Okay, I blow the lock, and in these go. They're down for 5 seconds. I take Uthan, and you shoot anything else still moving. Got it. Cover. Whomp. The door exploded, showering Kavara splinters, and Damin leaned forward and threw in the surprises. A blinding 300,000 candle power, white light, and 160 decibels of raw noise flooded the room for 2 seconds, and Damin was inside before he realized it, pinning Uthan flat to the floor as Aten pumped the array blaster across the room. The dust and smoke settled. Damin had cut Uthan. He didn't actually recall doing it, but that was adrenaline working. For some reason, he had expected a fight, but she was simply making an odd, incoherent groan. He had become used to Etan's resilience. Uthan was a regular human, untrained, unfit, and, apart from her intellect, nothing special. Damin picked up the verpine and aimed it at a wall. It made the faintest of whirring noises, then jammed. Nina was right. Verpines didn't bounce. Or maybe the mini EMP had temporarily fried its electronics. Damin here. We have Uthan. Repeat. We have Uthan. Vi's whoop hurt his ears. Nina cut in. Are we done here? Let's check. We haven't missed anything, Aten. He glanced over his shoulder. Aten was cradling the away blaster, staring down at 4 bodies on the floor. It was all a bit of a mess, as Vi would say. 3 of the dead were Trandoshans, and the 4th was a young red-haired woman who wasn't pretty any longer, or even recognizable. Damin wondered if the girl was Uthan's daughter. Then he had another thought. How many staff do you have here, ma'am? He took his helmet off and rolled her over so they were face to face. How many? Uthan seemed to be regaining her composure. You murdered my assistant. She had a blaster, Aten said, almost to himself. Damin shook her. Ma'am, I'm going to detonate an awful lot of ordnance under this building very soon. And your staff, if you have any, will be dead anyway. She was staring up into his face, seeming totally distracted by him. Are you really a clone? I'd like to say the one and only, but you know I am not. Amazing, she said. Staff. 4 more. They're just scientists. They're civilians. Darman opened his mouth and Cal Scarlata's voice emerged unbidden again. Not all soldiers wear uniforms, ma'am. High time those scientists took responsibility for their role in the war effort. Yes, it was personal. War didn't get much more personal than a virus aimed specifically at you and your brothers. Darman here, Sarge. Uthan's staff members are somewhere in the building, too. What do you want to do? Retrieve them as well? I'll check with Majestic. Wait, 1. Nina's link went dead for a few moments, and then crackled into life again. No, not required. Get her clear, and let us know when you're going to detonate. They were just following orders, Uthan said. So am I, Darman said. And Trust gagged and hooded her with savage parasail cord, and a sections of sheeting. He replaced his helmet and heaved her over his shoulder. It was going to be a tough job getting her down those tunnels. Atten followed. They slipped back down the drain. Darman hoped that they could find their way back to the surface without Jannot as their guide. Hoken could feel the sweat stinging his eyes. He withdrew the lightsaber and examined the substantial dent in the bulkhead. It wasn't deep enough or fast enough, and he knew it. This was displacement activity. He was little help to Harati, so he vented his frustration on the alloy, and all he seemed to succeed in was making the stale atmosphere even hotter and more suffocating. Then he heard a hiss of air, and he wondered if it was the seal breaching, but it wasn't. It was Harati. Hoken ran the few steps along the corridor to the office. He feared that the young captain had electrocuted himself, and whether he wanted to admit it or not, he actually cared what happened to him. But Harati was intact. He was leaning over the desk, both hands braced on the surface, head down, shoulders shaking. Then he looked up, and his face was a big, sweaty grin. A bead of perspiration ran down his nose, and hung there for a moment before he batted it away with his finger. "Check the status board, sir." Hoken swung around and looked for the board. The unchanging pattern of red lights had now become a pattern of red and green. "Bulkheads 2, 6, and 9, sir," he said. "Now I can clear the rest. I had to try every sequence. That's a lot of permutations." He shook his head and went back to carefully prodding a piece of circuit board with the tip of his knife. "They'll be jammed open, though. Better than jammed shut." As Hoken watched, the lights changed from red to green, one by one, and a cool draft hit his face. The front doors had opened. Hoken expected a missile or a blaster volley to punch through them, but all that entered was the silent, refreshing, fire-scented night air. "Harati," Hoken said, "right now I couldn't love you more if you were my own son. Remind me, I said that one day. He drew his blaster and raced down the corridors, past droids, stumbling over shattered metal plates and the body of an Ubaran, and into the room where he had left Uthan with her Trandoshan's guards. He had half expected to see her lying dead on the floor with them. In a way, he had hoped for it, because it would mean the Republics hadn't stolen her expertise. But she was gone. He picked up the Vulpine and tested it for charge. It made a faint whir and then ticked. Either Uthan hadn't managed to get a shot off, or they'd used an EMP grenade. Hoken worked his way down the passage to the biohazard chamber, pausing on the way to check inside prep rooms and storage cupboards, wary of booby traps. As he opened one door, he heard whimpering in the darkness. He switched on the light. The remaining 4 members of Uthan's research team, 3 young men and an older woman, were huddled in the corner. One of the men had held a blaster, but its muzzle was pointed at the floor. They blinked at Hoken, frozen. "Stay here," he said. "You might be all that's left of the virus program. Don't move." There seemed little chance that they would. When Hoken reached the central chamber, the only sign that anything untoward had taken place was that the concealed drain in the center of the floor was now a charred, gaping space. He looked around the walls, shelves, and cupboards. A mistake. He'd made a mistake. A terrible oversight. He hadn't taken the time to check what the virus containers looked like, or how many there had been. He could see gaps on shelves through the transparent doors. He pulled on the handles, but they were still locked. He ran back up the corridor and grabbed one of the young men from Uthan's team. "Do you know what the nanovirus looks like?" The boy blinked. "It has a structure based on..." "Idiot." Hoken jabbed fiercely toward his own eye, indicating, "Look. What does the container look like? How many? Come on, think." He hauled the scientist to his feet and dragged him down the corridor to the biohazard chamber. "Show me." The boy pointed to a plain-fronted cabinet, 14 alloy vials in there, inside their own vacuum-sealed case. "Open it and check." "I can't. Uthan has all the security codes and keys." "Is it conceivable that the enemy could have opened it and simply shut it again?" "Normally I'd say that was impossible. But I also remember thinking that it was impossible for anyone to breach this building." The hole where the drain had been was now a jagged fringe of scorched, broken tiling and twisted metal frame. Hoken looked down into the void and saw debris. For a moment, he wondered if he was actually dealing with human beings, and not some bizarre unknown life form. He knew where they'd gone. Now he had to hunt them down and stop them from taking Uthan off the planet with whatever was left of the nanovirus project. If this was what a handful of clone soldiers could achieve, he was almost afraid to think what millions might do. 18. You never have perfect knowledge in combat, gentlemen. It's what we call the fog of war. You can either sit around worrying what's real and what's not, or you can realize the enemy hasn't got a clue either, and fire off a few rounds of psychology. A truly great army is one that only has to rattle its saber to win a war. Sergeant Calscarata. Omega to a Majestic. Check, check, check. Ceased firing. Niner waited several minutes before moving. There had been trees to the northwest of the facility that weren't there anymore. You couldn't stake your life on the accuracy of gunnery support. He edged forward on his stomach and propped himself on his elbows to check the area. First with his binoc visor, and then through the scope of the DC-17. Nothing was moving, although nothing with any sense would present itself in a bright light doorway anyway. The facility was now stripped completely of its wooden farmhouse shell, and its alloy doors were wide open. For a few seconds, Nina almost expected to see Darman and Atin walk out into the yard, and for Calscarata to shout, "Index, index, index, end of exercise." But there were no more exercises, and this night wasn't over, not by a long shot. Behind him, Fai switched to his D's and trained the sniper attachment on the entrance, waiting to pick off anything insane enough to walk out. Nina wasn't sure if Fai would pause for thought if anyone did come out, even with raised hands. Dar Atin, can you confirm your position? Nina rated. Somewhere, pitch black and smelly, and dragging a semi-conscious woman behind me, Atin said. Sounds like happy hour at the Outlander, Nina said, although he had no idea what a nightclub was really like, and probably never would. The comment sprang from his subconscious. Is Uthan injured? Darket got fed up with her struggling and sedated her. How long before you can detonate? Muffled noises filled Nina's helmet. It sounded as if Atin was conferring with Darmans without the comlink. Maybe he removed his helmet to sip some water. A woman was making incoherent noises, and Nina heard Darman's voice clearly. Shut up, will you? He didn't need a medic to check Dar's stress levels. Atin was back on the link. At this rate, half an hour. Thigh, how fast could you cover one click right now? Unladen and suitably motivated? About 3 minutes. Now it was the timing that was giving them grief. They needed to keep whoever was in the facility right where they were until Darman was in position to detonate the implosion device. Nina wondered how long Majestic could wait, and how long it would be before they had more company. He decided to ask, Omega here, Majestic, what's that techno warship doing? Listening to port and smoking a bit, Omega. You've been busy. If we get busier, we'll let you know. We're dispatching the gunship now. It'll be reading when you reach the extraction point. Nina crawled back to Fai's positions and nudged him. You might as well make a move for the EP now, with Etain. I can hold this position. No. Can I give you an order? I might call you Sarge, but right now, I'm ignoring you. Etain appeared on the other side of Phi with Janot. What's happening? The gunship's on its way. I suggest you and Phi head out and meet it. Where's the man? About 50 meters down the tunnel. It's heavy going. It's still the quickest path through the warren, Janot said. Short of digging them out. Digging through 5 meters of soil without power tools or explosives is going to take a long time. Nina turned to Etain. Is there anything you can do, ma'am? Etain pushed her tangled hair back from her face. If Janot can find the shallowest point of the tunnel, I can try to pot the soil. If you explain to me what needs to happen, I can picture it. The more accurately I can picture it, the better my chances of bringing the force to bear. I have to see what's happening in my mind. I can find their positions, Janot said. By all means, bring your lightsaber, ma'am, Phi said. But only use it if you miss with this. He handed her his blaster. Etain shoved it in her belt. You persuaded me. Janot was fast. Etain had trouble keeping up with her when she was running on all fours, her snout to the ground. The Garanan's rhythmic sniffs were in counterpoint to Etain's gasping breath. They were moving in a square search pattern across the field to the east of the facility, trying to locate the exact sections of tunnel that Dawman and Phi had taken. Etain could sense Dawman now. They were close. Are you following scent? Etain panted. No, I'm listening for echoes. With your noise? Where I keep my ears is my own business, Janot stopped, dead, and pressed her snout into the soil, with a few short, strong snorts. Here, dig here. I hope they know we're right above them. We aren't. They're about 10 meters back up the tunnel. If you excavated where they are, you could bury them completely. Etain wasn't sure if Janot was making a general point about rescue procedure or commenting on her competence. She didn't care. Dawman was down there, and he needed her help. Etain was down there too, but the thought of Dawman focused her because he was a friend. She could almost imagine him advising her that sentimentality was a luxury that a commander could never afford. Here you go, she said, more to herself than to Janot. Etain knelt to one side of the line of the tunnel and placed her hands flat on the ground. When she closed her eyes, she visualized the warren, seeing its uneven walls with tree roots emerging from them like knotted rope. She saw small stones and seams of amber clay. Then her focus became more intense. She saw smaller roots, and then the individual grains of minerals and veins of organic material. She felt her breathing slowing, changing as if her lungs weren't moving within her, but rather the air outside her body was pressing and relaxing. Pressing and relaxing, slowly and rhythmically. And she finally saw the space around each microscopic grain. It wasn't empty, it was invisible. But it was not a void. Etain felt it. She had control of it at a fundamental subatomic level. She could feel the pressure throughout her body, Now all she had to do was shape it. At the size of the tunnel, she pictured the space thinning and reducing, compacting the walls, strengthening them against collapse. Overhead, and she now felt like she was lying flat on her back, looking up at the vaults above her. She saw the space expand. The greens moved farther apart. The space flowed in to displace them. The space flowed upward to lift them, and then the space was suddenly all there was. Etienne was aware of something cold and slightly damp across the backs of her hands, and opened her eyes. She was kneeling in fine, friable soil. It looked as if a patient gardener had sheathed it to prepare for planting seeds. She was looking down into an open trench. There was a domed line of soil along both sides, as neat and regular as if an excavator had done their job. "That," said Janot's voice beside her, "was quite extraordinary." The Golanan's tone was almost reverent. "Quite extraordinary." Etienne knelt back on her heels. Instead of exhaustion she normally felt after using the Force to shift objects, she felt refreshed. Janot slipped down into the trench and disappeared. A few moments later, a familiar blue-lit, T-shaped visor popped up from the darkness below, and it didn't alarm her at all. "There's always a career for you in the constructions industry, Commander," Daman said. He scrambled out of the trench, and Etienne threw her arms around him without thinking. Her blaster clunked against his armor plates. It was odd to hug something that felt like a droid, but she was overwhelmed by relief that he'd made it. She let go and stepped back, suddenly embarrassed. "Yeah, I've been in a sewer," he said, all guilt. "Sorry." Aten's voice carried from the trench. "Da, are you going to stand there all night posing for the Commander? Or are you going to help me lift this?" "As if I could forget," Daman said. After some grunting and cursing, the two commandos managed to lift a thoroughly trussed body onto the edge of the trench. Etienne pulled off the hood and stared into the half-closed eyes of Dr. Uthan. She was drifting in and out of consciousness. "How much did you give her?" Etienne asked. "Enough to shut her up," Daman said. Etienne had hoped the woman didn't vomit and choked to death. It was always a risk with heavy sedatives. They hadn't come this far to lose her. Etienne leaned forward, and Daman heaved Uthan onto his back. 10-minute shifts," Etienne said, "and I'll be counting." "I hope she's worth the effort," Etienne said. "So do I," Janot said. "You must make your own way now. I've done all I can. Remember us, Jedi. Remember what we have done for you, and that we expect your help in reclaiming our world. Honor that promise." Janot looked the Padawan up and down as if measuring her, and then the Golanin lost her outline and became black fluid again, vanishing into the undergrowth. "To think I nearly shot her," Daman said, shaking his head. They moved off toward the extraction point, across country remarkably empty of Gadans. Gezoken lined up the young scientist on the other side of the door. He gestured to Harati. On my mark, he said, kill the lights. Sir, if the speeders have been destroyed, what are we going to do? Hoken thought it an unusually stupid question for such a fine officer. But perhaps he was thinking about just how far untrained civilians might get on foot before falling to the enemy. Run, he said. Just run. He turned to the four biologists, hoping terror would speed them up as it often did. What's your name? He asked the woman. Sheva, she said. Well, Sheva, when the lights go out, hang on to me and run like crazy, understand? Yes. And if the captain or I shout drop, you drop down flat, got that? I can assure you I have. Harati, you take the rear. Don't lose any of them. Hoken was expecting more laser bombardment. It was quiet outside, but he felt that it would begin again as soon as they emerged. He couldn't defend a facility with its doors jammed open. There was at least one squad of enemy commandos still out there. His last chance was to make a run for it with the remnants of Uthan's team and hide them somewhere. Then he would look for Uthan. One way or another, he would salvage what he could of the nanovirus program. Beyond that, he hadn't made plans. Ready, Harati? Ready, sir. Hoken slid on his Mandalorian helmet, as much for comfort as protections. Lights.